This week on the 77% Street Debate.
My first loan, I took it through Shylock. They normally give you loan on a perspective of taking something from you.
Why go to this unregulated person instead of going to a bank?
There's so much that school didn't teach me. It didn't teach me taxes. It didn't teach me how to manage my money.
People have killed themselves in this country because of debt. Yeah. People have run away from their houses. People have done so many bad things because of the consequences of being in debt.
The 77% is back in Nairobi, Kenya's capital, and it is here that as of April last year, we were told that 14 million loan accounts have been blacklisted by what we call the Credit Reference Bureau. These are the people who basically determine whether or not you get credit. And for those people, they're at risk of either not getting financial services at all or getting limited access to credit. And so our question today is it fair to lock out people from money, knowing full well they might not have any other options? Well, who better to answer this question for me than my fellow Kenyans? So we're going to start with Emmanuel, who's really a representation of what most Kenyans experience, being caught up in the debt cycle. So Emmanuel, in 2019, before COVID, you had a job as a waiter, and then 2020 happened, COVID, you lost your job, unfortunately, and I'm sorry. And then you decided life is too tough, I need to borrow money. So where did you go?
I went to Equity Bank to borrow 27,000 just to pay for my rent and pay for some food stuff.
And when you went to the bank, what did you say you wanted the money for? Were you honest that you wanted to use this money for rent?
No, I just borrowed the money to pay for some education.
So you lied and you said you wanted to pay for school fees.
Because I needed the money at that moment.
Yeah, you were desperate.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand that. Eric, you were in a similar situation, right? Tell me what circumstances led you to borrow?
It was because I needed to do my usual routine, breakfast, supper, lunch, things like credit, phone, you know.
Yeah.
You have your girlfriend there, you have to
You have your girlfriend there?
Yes.
You were borrowing to take care of your girlfriend?
No, you know, if you don't perform, she'll leave you. So you have to do everything to make her happy.
I was not expecting this conversation to go like that. So where did you borrow money from?
I borrowed from friends.
Uh-huh.
I borrowed from these apps on mobile apps.
Yeah.
Yes, there are some that give loans, cheap loans.
In the end, yeah, how much debt did you have accumulated?
I had a lot of debt, like 9,000 to 10,000. Yeah.
And how did you pay back?
I started hustling when the work came back.
Okay, well, that's interesting because what these two gentlemen are telling me is quite honestly surprising. The statistics from the Digital Lenders Association of Kenya here says that people borrow money primarily to invest in their businesses and then education, but not necessarily for recurrent expenditure.
Yeah, basically, in the lending market, in the financial sector, you find that, and what Emmanuel is saying is very true. People will not be honest with the reason for borrowing. I want to go and buy a car, but I will come and say I want to buy a plot. I want to go and build some structures at home, my roof went off, I want to repair it. But basically, in most of the loans that are consumer-based loans, basically they go to recurrent expenditure. And most times, because those loans do not generate income, then they are defaulted, they are not paid.
Yeah.
So basically, you start chasing after people who borrowed loans from you and basically put them into expenditure. When you buy clothes, you buy food. There is nothing that you get out of it. That money is consumed. You have a headache of how to pay.
Okay, so let's come to the ladies here because you're both entrepreneurs and also relying on credit from banks, from maybe some of these mobile apps that we're hearing. Olive, when you were borrowing money to start your business, did you lie about why you needed the money?
First of all, I didn't even borrow in a bank because I didn't, for you to borrow in a bank, you have to deposit in a bank. Your cash flow statements, in and out, determine the type of loan you get. When I was starting my business, child, you're fresh from school, like, where are you removing money? So my first thought was, I don't want to go spook my parents and be like, Dad, Mom, friends, give me money. There's something called lending apps in Kenya, and there's so many that I can start with. No one knows me, no one knows my problems, so I can start from there. So I personally relied so much on lending apps, and what I learned is the more I saved in the lending apps, the more the loan limit was increased. So that's how I started my business, and that's how I use the lending apps, to be honest.
Would you credit the success of your business, or at least the capital injection, to credit?
Yes, I would, because when you're fresh from school, you're usually told, please save your money, save your pocket money, but you don't see the essence of that until you finish school. So you finish school and you're like, okay, I'm not necessarily getting a job. Where can I get capital? So you can't go back to your parents who've schooled you for 4 good years and you're like, Dad, give me more money. So you literally start learning the ropes and you realize, oh, so there's lending apps. And I personally would say they worked for me because I was able to fund my businesses, especially operating expenses, with the lending app.
Okay, let me come to Tony here for a second, because we're hearing that family and friends actually constitute the second largest majority of where we get our credit from. This was astounding to me, that before you go to a bank, you go first to a third party who is until December unregulated, and then you go to your family and friends. And you're saying, we need to regulate this space as well. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, over the last 10 years, digital lending apps have exploded in Kenya. We have the largest number of lending apps per capita on the planet. More statistically crazy is that the regulatory framework for it is 7 years too late. And I also think that when over the last 7.5 years, when fintech apps showed up, it's when it moved from family and friends and then institutional like SACCOs, chamas and banks to fintech apps. So it's a very young culture. And looking around at social media and the consumerism culture we have, KBS, Kenya Bureau of Statistics, says only 17% of the people between the ages of 23 and 33 have a business that makes them any form of money. So a lot of the businesses we're talking about Olive and them, a lot of young people who have businesses are not making any profit. So when you have a 60 or 90-day credit system, where are you getting your money from? And that's why we're trying to, with Tribe, which is a startup we founded, we're trying to make it so that you can be able to borrow from friends, families, and colleagues and have a credit rating system between partners. So then you don't have to pay too much.
So you're saying that you and I are friends, Tony,
right?
And I borrow money from you.
Yeah.
And so this app will create a credit system for me where our friends will see and say, Edith is not trustworthy, please don't lend her money.
Right, and that's the reason why, I think for me that's the reason why credit makes so much sense, because the tagline is funds for friends by friends. Currently, the interest rates on average in Kenya are 24% for any money borrowed. 24% is the average on any money borrowed. And usually when you go in anything, the chance of you getting a 24% return on that investment is absurd. It doesn't matter what you invest in, gold, silver, try it. It doesn't work in a 30-day period. So how do you expect people in a country that's middle income, like our good friends here, to come up with the kind of capital you want them to come up with in that period of time? But amongst our friends, we have a much more softer value system between people. We've grown up as an African community where we share everything. I mean,
we do.
The Ubuntu tagline still holds. A child is brought up by a village, not a family. And by taking us that situation, leveraging on technology to be able to create credit scores around each other, I know you can lend me, up to 7,000 shillings. And because you're my friend, I have a third-party interest in keeping our relationship going. And so do I with our community of friends. There's a higher chance I'll pay you back.
Okay, let's come back to Eric, because obviously, Eric, you are not borrowing from your friends. You are borrowing from these mobile lenders that we're talking about, digital lenders. And you go in there, you put in a couple of details, boom. They have all your information and you have your 2,000 shillings. If you don't give them this money on time, what happens?
Okay, they'll text you, they'll send you a couple of messages on your phone. Even I stopped using one of my mobile numbers because of how they were sending me messages. They were sending a lot of messages reminding me to pay.
Yeah.
So even I threw my line.
Okay, Emmanuel, have you had a similar experience where people were, calling you, threatening you with things? What was your experience when it came to the collection of your debt?
Most of friends that lended me the money, it was tough to handle them because some of them were angry, telling you that the money it's been long since I owed you this money. So if they come in your house, they pick television.
So it was your friends who were actually coming to your house to take items that were of significant value in order to repay themselves.
They are worth their money.
Yeah, that must have been very painful and hurtful.
It was painful, but you can't do anything because you owe them.
Yeah, because you owe them.
And you told them that the money I'll give you in the end of this month.
I'd like to come to Maria so that I can hear what she wanted to say earlier. We were talking about what some might say are predatory lending practices and also predatory recovery practices. Is this something that you've experienced?
Yeah, actually, my first loan, I took it through Shylock. And after taking that money, it wasn't specifically for what I took.
By the way, Shylock in this context is what we were talking about earlier, the unregulated creditors.
They normally give you loan on a perspective of taking something from you. So when I took that money, was to buy a phone. and then I shifted into another location because I didn't want them to find me, and then I changed my number. So right now I also have a debt for Shylock.
Why go to this unregulated person instead of going to a bank or to a SACCO with Mr. Washington there?
When you go to a bank, you need to be having an account there. And a bank to give you a loan, it's very hard because now you have to have sort of connection with them. So Shylock, you just go and tell that person, you know what, man, I'm stranded and I need money. They tell you that you need to have a guarantor or place something that is going to repay that.
So it's easy, it's accessible.
Yeah, it's accessible.
All right. Washington, I want to come back to you because we're hearing words that I'm sure any lender doesn't want to hear, like, I lied, it's easy, it's accessible, I have no intention of paying. In fact, I skipped town. But the amount you're paying now is almost 3 times the principal amount. Is that moral? For you as a person who's working in a SACCO to have lent me 2,000 shillings and to have now collected 6,000 and still be demanding more on that 2,000 principal?
A Shylocking is a person who is not regulated. It's sort of illegal to do Shylocking in Kenya.
Yeah.
And that is why you see some of these companies have started registering limited companies to be able to use it as a platform to lend money. So the reason why that interest rate will skyrocket and become so huge, even more above whatever you borrowed, is because it's not regulated. But when you come to regulated organizations like SACCOs and banks, then you cannot charge me, if I borrow 2,000, I cannot repay more than 4,000. But at the end of the day, we'll say the reason why we find the young people in this cycle of debt is, one, we have a challenge of how we manage our social life. Basically, because why are we talking about people borrowing for consumption? It's because I went out and saw in CJ and taking a good meal. I wanted to feel good about it, and I don't have the cash.
But I mean, that's not entirely fair. Olive here and Maria have spoken of how they're taking to invest. They're borrowing to invest. Not everybody is borrowing for consumption, as you're saying.
Sometimes our budgets are not realistic. We sometimes become over-ambitious. And we've learned the skill of starting small and growing. We want to jumpstart our business today. Today have a small business, tomorrow I'm banking millions of money in the account.
Tell me what your thoughts are.
To your point of why are people having Shylock send people to come and beat them up, is because both the lender and the borrower are completely unprotected. There's no regulation that guards and protects the lender, which there should be, and there's no regulation that guards and protects the borrower, which there should be. So if you're going to borrow 30,000 shillings, like the gentleman Emmanuel did, and you have 30 days to pay it back, or 60 days to pay it back, or 90 days to pay it back, can we just look at the average minimum wage in this country and figure out how you're going to come up with that money, because that's where he's living at. And in fact, when you talk to Washington, he explains elaborately how when you have more lenient and long-term payment procedures,
As SACCOs often do, they have a much higher return rate and a lot more people paying their debt because life happens. I want to come back to Joshua for a second because I think basic economic theory states that a person who lends money must be prepared to not get it back in return. Shouldn't the lenders, the Washingtons of this world, assume some degree of risk? And therefore the question of you have to pay your debt, is it really accurate?
We are living in a form of extractionist kind of economic system. Look at the government. The government extracts, whereas the citizen expects services that the cost of living will go down as much as we are paying high taxes. And that's the model that the government has always been using. But what have we been finding is that the government extracts, whereas the citizen does not receive services. So the citizen has to go into their pocket so that they can be able to afford the basic livelihood.
Okay,
so
Joshua, I totally understand that, but it doesn't answer my question, which is, knowing all this, is it then fair to expect that these same youths will, whether or not they borrow that money for their girlfriends, will be able to pay back the credit?
It follows the same extraction pattern.
Right.
So the citizens are following the pattern of the government. That here is an easier way. They're going there with any intention of obeying the obligations that comes with the borrowing of these loans.
I like that phrase that you've introduced, Joshua, extractionist model. If only I can say it. Tony, I'm coming to you. Please don't run away. Because I could hear you mmming and ahming in the background.
I think there's two parts to it.
Yeah.
The blaming of government and constantly shifting blame to someone else has its limitations. It's true we are in an extractionist economy. It's true inflation has skyrocketed. And you're right in saying our parents are earning more than we are pound for pound or shilling for shilling. But there's a couple of things that we also need to change. And two of them are, we understand that we're in a consumerism culture. You have an iPhone, why do I have to have an iPhone? The concept is to be called, to use my texting, whatever. If I can get something for, $150 instead of something for $1,000, I should do that. We don't do that. The second thing is, I think there's a lot of misinformation and just general lack of knowledge in terms of financial management. A lot of these fintech apps, including SACCOs and banks and financial institutions, they are very good at lending, but they're very bad at educating. Yeah, so if we know people are lying about it, can we improve that?
So, Tony, speaking of, that leads me to Olive, because education seems to be a key thing that's coming out here.
Yes.
Do you think if people had more knowledge, they would make less risky loans?
When I finished school and then I entered adulthood, I quickly realized that there's so much that school didn't teach me. Let's start from, it didn't teach me taxes, it didn't teach me how to manage my money, it didn't teach me how to survive adulthood. And
No one teaches you that.
no one teaches you all this. And that's when I quickly ran to YouTube. So I'm looking for people to teach me these things, and I realized no one does that. And safe to say that's when I started my channel, because I was like, okay, no one is telling me things, no one is telling me how to survive. Let me create my YouTube channel, and whatever I learn, I'm gonna share. And that's when I'm saying, in the process, I realized, when I did my video for how to borrow a loan from M-Shwari, and people were excited to learn. And I was explaining to them guys, these are the terms. If you don't pay, the interest rate goes up. And if you miss the 30-day period, they'll extend your loan for another 30 days. And if you don't pay, the percentage of rate increases. And everyone's like, oh, I didn't know this.
So University of YouTube seems to be a popular option.
Yes.
Yeah, but what are the risks for this? Because obviously not everything that's on YouTube is credible.
It's up to you as well, because let's first credit the fact that information is easy to get now. Our parents, I think they had to go to libraries, or they had to depend on what their parents have told them, or word of mouth. But for me, I just need to buy 10 MBs, and I'm going to go to Google, read a gazillion articles, and trust me, Edith, if you read 10 articles about lending, I mean, you should kind of know what to expect.
Okay, let me come to Eric, because you had the capacity of mind to be like, I'm not paying this debt, and you knew how to escape your lenders. So you also knew what the consequences would be. Did you, or you didn't? Or you said you didn't care?
Yeah,
now that you do you think you would borrow differently? Or does an education not matter? If you're desperate, you're desperate. Tell me.
Yeah, it depends now. I cannot take it just like the last time how I took it, because I don't know where the loan that I threw away the line, I don't know where they took my name or my ID number. I don't know where they kept me on CRB, or they blacklisted me in anywhere. I don't know.
Joshua, let me come back to you. There's something that Olive has said, and it keeps coming back to what Tony has said, this sense of community. We have intrinsic knowledge of how to do this. Why then is it that when it comes to formal debt, it's usually associated with violence? Literally going into somebody's house and taking away their property.
Personally, I'm looking at both parties. The person that is lending you money, they are spending so that they can lend you money. So it doesn't make any sense that if they get into a contractual engagement with you, that you fulfill this, and I fulfill my part of the obligation.
Come on, Joshua, let's not kid each other. We've just heard that people are using text messages, calling your employers to harass you.
But that's what you got into when you agreed to the terms of the engagement that you got into. It's a contract, not a family.
No, I'm hearing no. Let me hear from Tony first, and then I'll come to you, Olive. No. Tony says no way.
I'm like, absolutely not. The Kenya Data Protection Act protects every single individual from having their phone scraped and their details used for anything but the service
without
that's required.
consent.
Without consent. Yeah. And even when they ask you for consent, they still cannot use your data against you. They can use your data for creating credit score systems or anything like that. They can check all of these things. But no one should be allowed, and no one can be allowed to come and use your information against you. Like call your mom, call your best friend, call your husband, call your wife. It's illegal. Flat out, simple.
Great. Let's hear from Olive. You're saying, back to the point for Joshua, that no. You have absolutely no right whatsoever to get into my private business to try and extract your finances.
Now when I think about it, guys, I'm like, it's messed up, because I might be able, as Olive, to work hard and pay that loan in 30 days. but can everyone?
Okay, so
Exactly.
we're going back to the original question of is
Yeah.
it fair and to whom? All right, so we had the consequences earlier. Washington, I'm coming to you. We had earlier from Maria about one of the unintended consequences of being in bad debt. What are some of the other consequences?
The youth are not finding themselves in this debt willingly. They're being pushed to that corner.
Right.
If I borrow from you as Edith, you're gonna shame me. You are in a certain WhatsApp group and they say, Achana now, he doesn't even pay, you owe me. But then what's he talking about? I don't want that shame. So I better, and she said, these people do not know me. So
Yeah.
I better go to a fintech that doesn't know me. I'm buying behind a veil. I am borrowing behind a veil. But when this veil gets uncovered now, it becomes very bad.
Okay.
And that is the reason why the government has come to introduce the regulation. So that at the end of the day, even if it is a fintech, it uses formal and legal ways to be able to collect this money.
Oh yeah, by the way, I think it's really important for us to say this, that the government of Kenya recently as December of 2021, actually regulated the digital lending space by amending a central bank bill. So back to the point of consequences, another one could be?
Some other things that people get into trying to manage their debt. Sometimes we've seen families break up. Reason being, as a husband, my wife went and borrowed from a fintech or maybe from some other Shylock. So the Shylock comes into the house, or my wife purchased the refrigerator or the TV and it's picked, I don't find it in the house. What happens? Where did the TV go? And she's in pains to explain that a Shylock somewhere took the fridge to cater for the debt. Then what happens? People get into depression. People have killed themselves in this country because of debt.
Yeah.
People have run away from their houses. People have done so many bad things because of the consequences of being in debt.
So it's a real social issue.
It is a social issue
Okay.
and it is growing and growing.
Washington, thank you so much for that. But now I'd like to hear solutions. Antony, I'm inclined to come to you first. Because you already have one of them, which is regulation of even the most informal spaces. What other ideas do you have to control this debt appetite, as Washington so well put it?
What we're doing at Tribe is not the answer to every problem, that's for sure. But we feel like there's a power in peer-to-peer lending and saving that allows everybody to be involved in everybody else's finances. I have a stake in Emmanuel's success.
Yeah.
And so if he gets into a situation, I'm happy to keep giving him and giving him and giving him if he's my boy, because his winning is my winning. But if you do a fintech app, it's not going to work the same way. It's going to be focused on the interest rates and how much money you can get from him. So I think one of the first ways to improve the situation we're in now is to include everyone in the conversation, to bring community back into finances.
Let's come to the educator. Olive, solutions.
My first solution is books. You know, there's a quote I read and it said, hide information in books because Africans will not read them. It pains me, but is it not true? Like, do people actually read books? The second one I'd literally point across is Google or YouTube or information in general. If books are not your thing, right, just go to Google and decide every morning I'm going to research 10 articles about borrowing, 10 articles about managing money,
Yeah.
10 articles on how I can properly scale my assets or increase my income.
And
And
the
then the
third one?
final one I'd point across is mindset. Our mindset is a bit troubling because you borrow and you're just like, salut, and you're gone. And then we come back and say SMEs are not doing well or all these things are not doing well. So again, the mindset needs to change a bit. Let's own up to, yes, I didn't have money, I borrowed, but can I also have the respect to at least pay it back?
Payback.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Let me come back to this side. Joshua, I'd like you to share what you're sharing here with Washington. Solutions, please.
Today, you are one sickness away to become a poor person.
Yeah, true.
So here are some of my recommendations. The government should invest in social protection programs that specifically focus on the youth. All right. Right now we have so many of them. We have the National Government Affirmative Action Fund. We have the Youth Enterprise Fund. We have the Women Enterprise Fund, and all those. But the problem with this funding is that it has received a lot of political political influence that it is not meeting its target objective.
Yeah.
So the government, instead of segregating all these youth social protection plans, it should consolidate them to even save on the cost of administration of these funds.
Right.
And accommodate as many youth.
So you're saying consolidate these funds, make it one central social net.
Make it one social net for
youth.
For the youth, where
Yeah.
the youth can easily access these funds.
Okay.
and use them for forever businesses.
All right, Washington, very quickly, solutions.
One of the solutions, I think, is we inculcate a culture of proper management of our resources, because sometimes through the debate we've experienced where people are borrowing for not very good reasons. So I think from a very tender age, as parents and the people are growing up, we need to inculcate the culture of financial management in ourselves, so that when it comes to borrowing, basically you cannot run away from that. But when you're borrowing for the right purpose.
Yeah.
You're borrowing what you can be able to repay, borrow within your means, and also we need to learn how to live within our means.
And finally, Eric, what do you think it will take for youth who are your friends, who are in your community, to stop taking bad debts, as we've been told?
The first reason, I think, is to take reasonable loans.
So not for your girlfriend, as you said earlier.
Yeah, or to go for dates.
Okay.
And second, you take information.
Yeah.
You have information about taking loans.
Did you find this conversation useful?
Yeah, it was
Fantastic.
useful.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful and insightful debate. I've learned so much. It's felt a little bit like an economic class. I don't know how you felt, but if there's anything I've learned is that it's not that clear cut. Is debt an economic issue or a social one? To be honest, I still don't know, but I know that I'm thankful that you're watching. Asante sana.